The pro-Batista remnants of the Cuban military, who were trying to keep control in the aftermath, then declared the oldest judge of the Cuban Supreme Court to be the new president, because that was what was supposed to happen under the Cuban Constitution. And the judge took over, and he acted as president for a few hours, but the only decision of any consequence he made was to order the military to surrender to Castro. So the next time somebody asks you which Cuban president Fidel Castro overthrew, you can act all smug and superior and say, actually, it wasn't Batista, it was Justice Carlos Manuel Piedra. Now, the question of short-serving leaders becomes a little bit complicated once you are forced to think about failed coups, because you do sometimes have these situations in which a guy is able to successfully overthrow his country's government for like 24 hours or so, but then is overthrown himself. So does a person who successfully overthrows a country's government for only a few hours count as the leader of that country during those few hours? Or do we think there is some magic amount of time that you have to hold power for before it really counts? Like 2 days or a week? I always find this question very interesting because it sort of gets into bigger existential questions of time and identity. So imagine that you, the person watching this video right now, just finished overthrowing the government of your country. And as a reward, you are sitting in the president's office right now watching this video. Right now, all that exists is this moment. There is no future in this moment. There is only now. And right now, you are the president of this moment. But does the significance of that moment go completely out the window just because you get overthrown a few hours later? On January 7th, 1991, Haiti's former defense minister, a guy named Roger Lafontaine, violently seized control of Haiti's presidential palace with the help of some militia guys. His people captured the president and forced her to resign on camera. And then he went on camera himself and declared himself the new president. And a few hours later, the army overthrew him and restored the legitimate president to power. Lafontaine was shortly after sentenced to life in prison for treason. So the question is, was Lafontaine the actual president of Haiti for those few hours, or just some crazy person? Is the right to claim to be in power determined by strength or law? Or how about this case in Venezuela? On April 12, 2002, a faction of the Venezuelan army that hated President Hugo Chavez captured him and overthrew him. They forced him to resign and made this guy called Pedro Carmona president in his place. Carmona, in turn, quickly started making all of these very radical decisions, abolishing the Constitution and dissolving the Congress. This is a very complicated story, but what they say happened next is that the military suddenly started to have second thoughts, and so they overthrew Carmona and brought back Chavez. The coup and the counter-coup all took place in just a few hours. But the story, in fact, even becomes more complicated than that, because there was this whole other day-long period in between the time when Carmona was overthrown and they were able to actually bring Chavez physically back to the presidential palace from wherever they were previously keeping him. So let me try to do the timeline here. Carmona took over on April 12th, and he was later overthrown that same day. But because they couldn't get Chavez back in time, they swore in his vice president, a guy named Diosdado Cabello, and they made him president instead. By that time, it was April 13th. And then by the time they actually got Chavez back to the Venezuelan White House or whatever, it was April 14th. So that is 4 presidents in the course of 72 hours. But short-serving leaders are not always a product of war and turmoil. Sometimes it is just old-fashioned constitutional gimmickry. For example, take South Africa. In 2008, President Thabo Mbeki announced that he would resign the presidency on midnight of September 24th. Now, the South African Constitution says that whenever a president resigns, Parliament gets to pick the new president. But obviously, Parliament couldn't meet right at midnight. Well, I guess they could have, but they didn't want to. Politicians need their sleep, too. So instead, they met a few hours later on the morning of September 25th. And they elected some guy named Kgalema Montalate as the country's new president. But who was president during those few precious hours between midnight of September 24th and the morning of September 25th? Well, the South African Constitution also says that the government gets to declare a temporary acting president in such circumstances. And so the president of South Africa during the wee hours of the morning of September 25th, 2008 was Ivy Matsipe Kasaburi, the Minister of Communications and South Africa's first ever female president, though she held office for less time than it takes me to get out of bed. Kind of cheapens the honor a little bit, don't you think? And now let us close this video with a fun new feature that I like to call Weekly Mail. I really like interacting with all the cool mail that you guys send me, but I also know it is not everyone's cup of tea to sit through a 20-minute video of me opening parcels. So instead, I thought maybe we would just open one parcel a week. And this week we have a parcel from my friend Mark, who lives in Australia. Mark says, "Good day, JJ." And he has drawn a very charming picture of me on the cover. He says it looks like a preschooler's drawing. He has sent me a book of Australian political cartoons called Trigger Warning. The cartoonist's name is Bill Leak. And what Mark says is some of the political cartoons are controversial, and the cartoon on page 89 in particular caused the Australian Human Rights Commission to get involved. The stress of fighting the case caused the cartoonist to die a week after this book was published. Wow. Let's take a look at this cartoon. So in this cartoon we have an Australian cop, and he's saying, "You have to have a sit down and talk to your son about personal responsibility." And then the other guy says, "Yeah, right. What's his name then?" So this is clearly some social commentary on the Aboriginal people of Australia. Pretty controversial stuff. That's a pretty remarkable story that the guy died over the stress of litigating the case. On a happier note, Mark has also sent me this charming Australian flag. It even says Australia on it. That's very cool, Mark. Thank you very much. I will put it over here with my South African flag that my other friend got me. I look forward to reading this. I am a huge fan of political cartoons. If you are looking for something good to send me in the mail, feel free to get me some cartoons from your country. But anyway, this video is kind of all over the place, isn't it? If you have any good, short-serving world leaders that you know about, post them in the comments below. I'll see you next week.